there's another performance or something. I just want to show you some pictures. I don't just want to give a speech. Beautifully, just a moment ago. So we have to do that. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Next up, Oakland Military Institute would like to present Brooklyn North with Singing Dark Times. Let's give her a round of applause. I'm just trying to, I just oh.
This ain't the right time for you to fall in love with me. Well, baby, I'm just being honest. And I know my lies cannot make you believe. Running in circles, that's why. In my dark times, I'll be going back to these streets, promising everything I do not need. In my dark times, baby, this is all I could be. And only my mother could love me for me. In my dark times, in my dark times. Light one down, let me burn the smoke. Still coming down, dripping through. I got another man's blood on my clothes, but it ain't his fault, it's the life I chose. This ain't the right time for you to fall in love with me. My baby, I'm just being honest. And I know my lies can never make you leave. Running in circles, that's why. In my dark times, I'll be going back to these streets, promising everything I do not need. In my dark times, baby, this is all I could be. And only my mother could love me for me. In my dark times, in my dark times, in my dark times, I still got some problems, I know. Driving too fast, but just moving too slow. And I've got something I've been trying to let go of, pulling me back every time. Making those promises that I would not keep. In my dark times, baby, this is all I could be. And only my mother could love me for me. In my dark times, taking it back to the streets, making those promises that I would not keep. In my dark times, baby, this is all I could be. And only my mother could love me for me. In my dark times, in my dark times, in my dark times. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Let's give her another round of applause. So, for many of you who don't know what the song really means, it pertains to our theme of beauty behind the dark times or madness. So the song she just sung was a very, very good song. Thank you, Brooklyn.
Well, good morning again. See, that was meant to happen. That way you got a bonus. And I'd much rather listen to this beautiful young lady with this beautiful voice than me sit up here and show you pictures. But I'll go on and do my job. Now, the theme, I gave it a lot of thought, and I think Vice Admiral, who I'm very, very impressed by, really hit the nail on the head. All of this is hallowed ground, all of it. And much blood has been shed for us to be here today in this gathering. I guess 50 years ago or 100 years ago, this would have been inconceivable for this audience to sit together. So I'm going to do something that these words suggest. Now, slavery was abolished in the United States, I think, in 1863, certainly by 1865 at the end of the U.S. Civil War. But the psychological chains are still there on the minds of many of us. Many of us close our minds like you close a door or window for fear that a new idea might come in. And I'm going to ask you to see if we can break some of those psychological chains today. Now, I'm going to talk about enslavement. You have to talk about it. Notice I didn't say slavery, but enslavement, but I'm not going to start from there. I think that that's one of the defects of Black History Month, is that we tend to focus on a limited phase in African and African American history. Most people, when they start their history, they start from the high points. You know, Europeans tend to talk about Greece and Rome, whereas African Americans are almost pigeonholed into starting with enslavement, perhaps our lowest point in history. Now, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about it from a different perspective. But before we get to that, I'm going to show you something vastly different. Now, this is just a map right here. This is Africa. This is where humanity itself began. There's only one race, and that's the human race, which began in Africa. This is what science tells us. And those Africans went out all over the world before slavery. Now, I'm 61 years old. I've been doing these presentations for a long time. I've now lectured in 62, 63 countries. It seems like I lost a country somewhere. And I visited in the last 17, 18 years, 112, 113 countries. Again, I lost one somewhere. I haven't unpacked a suitcase since 1997. Okay, so I travel all the time. Yesterday, in order to get here, I started off in Charleston, South Carolina. I flew over the tornadoes and went to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and from there to Cleveland, Ohio, where I got caught in a snowstorm and did a lecture, and then flew from Cleveland to Las Vegas, where I encountered a mechanical difficulty, and finally to San Francisco, and then to Oakland. In fact, I woke up yesterday not really knowing where I was. I would imagine those of you who travel a lot, or sometimes you find yourself in the same situation. Now, the sub-theme, well, anyway, this is one of my great teachers. I suppose it's important to acknowledge those who have paved the way. And this is a man from America. But when we talk about the Americas, or when I talk about the Americas, I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about from Alaska to Argentina. And this was my great instructor. His name was Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. And a lot of the themes that I'm going to talk about in my short 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes that I have with you, he is responsible for. Now, I want to start at the beginning. I guess the beginning is always a good place to start. And this skull right here represents the first person in the Americas, and it's a black woman. The skull has been reconstructed. This is a person named Lucia. And this is a skull that was found in Brazil. It's about 30,000 years old. And scientists have done a reconstruction of it and says that this is what it looked like. This is before slavery, this is before Columbus, this is before any of that. And it's my belief that the worst thing you can do is to teach a child that their history began with enslavement. If you do that, you psychologically cripple that child, whether you know it or not. And so those are the kind of chains psychologically that I'm asking all of us to break. This is a Black History program, but Black History isn't just for Black people, it's for everybody. So that we all have a kind of a level playing field, that we can start at the same point. Okay. Lucia, and then we're going to spend some time in this country right now, Mexico. I know there are many, many Latinos who are here, and so I think it's interesting too to combine all of these elements, because African history is everybody's history. It's not isolated. People have always intermingled. And the most important, well, this is another image that I want to show. I guess this fits in with the theme of hallowed ground, or hallowed grounds. This is the first pyramids in the Americas. This is in Mexico, a place called La Venta. And the people that built those pyramids look like these heads right here. Now these are called the Olmec heads, and there are 17 of them. I've seen in photographs 16 of them. God willing, I'm going to get to the next one in June. And these heads represent a civilization called the Olmec, O-L-M-E-C, which is the first civilization of the Americas. It began around 2000 BC, or roughly 4,000 years ago. These are the first people to move large objects in stone in the Americas, to have a calendar, to engage in agricultural science, even to engage in organized sports. The Olmec led the way. Now, the Olmec civilization was a Native American civilization, but in that Native American civilization, you have an African element. And I just want to show you some of the images of these heads right here. These are the early excavations going all the way back to 1869. And you can see what some of these faces, in fact, what all of them look like. One of them weighs 80,000 pounds, 40 tons. So I think it's very important that we see these. Now, this is not taught in the schools in the U.S., nor is it taught in Mexico. In fact, when I do these presentations, and my colleagues do these presentations in Mexico, sometimes we are met with fierce resistance, because people tend to think, or sometimes think, that we're attempting to take away their civilization from them, which is the last thing in the world that I would want to do. But I also want to show that there's been a degree of harmony and in a mixture in the Americas for a very, very long time, for thousands of years. These are all my original photos right here. This is in a place called Villahermosa. This one is called the Copata head. This is the biggest head. It's 80,000 pounds. And it looks like it's squinting. It's in a Zocalo, or public square, in a place called Santiago Tuxtla. And these are all images that I've taken quite recently. I think in a couple of these you'll even see myself here and there. This is one of my favorites right here. This one is 20 tons. This is an Olmec goddess. I think a lot of times when we talk about history, we do ourselves a disservice because it tends to become his story. And I think it's also very, very important to include the role of women in historical analysis. This is an Olmec goddess. There's that head again, a big one. Here's another one. This one is called El Negro. Is it always this quiet? I'm already nervous. Let the choir say amen from time to time. It makes me feel better. This one actually has braids in the back. And you can see the comparison here. You can see this in Oakland. And then I want to show these comparisons. Because when I was a student at UCLA, I was told that these features didn't originally look like this. but that they were typically Native American. I don't know what that means, because even Native Americans have a degree of diversity. And I was asked, well, why do they look like black people? I asked my professor, naive young student. I didn't do very well in that class, I might add. And he says, well, look, what happened was there was a massive earthquake. And the earthquake caused their heads to roll around in the mud, 40,000 pounds now, caused their heads to roll around in the mud for a very, very long time. And when they stopped rolling, they looked like black people. So I put this in here, because obviously she was in that same earthquake. And again, see, we are pigeon-toed. Black people tend to be pigeonholed into a specific area of history. And the idea now, it's not hard to conceive that Columbus came over here, because he did. And now people are beginning to say that the Vikings came too. But Africa is closer to the Americas than Europe is. And Africans have a long history of navigational skills. So why couldn't African people have settled the Americas, or at least